Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Gary Warmerdam is with me, and this will be the second episode of Navigating the Netflix Realm. How you doing, Gary?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
How are things in Colorado?
It's been pretty hot lately, but we've had a few kind of cool flash flood storms, like summertime storms,
Yeah.
and those are really cool. We got caught out in one coming back from a bike ride one time. It started hailing on us.
Yeah. Wow. Like a summer hail?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I can't say I've had a summer hail before. So you post a lot of pictures of your skies and stuff there in Colorado. And what's interesting is like oftentimes when you post your pictures of your skies, we'll have the exact same sky over here in Texas that day, or it'll be like the same sky we had the day before. So like, I'm wondering, are they just using the same screensavers or, right? Or are we just all in the same movie theater, not realizing it?
I don't know. That's pretty wild. That is it just like vaguely similar, or like you could actually notice, actual cloud formation?
Yeah, no, like within 10%.
Okay.
Like within 10% of being identical, right? And one of the
so 90% identical is what you're saying.
Yeah, within 10% of being exactly like, yeah, it's 90% identical, right? That kind of thing. Yes, mostly identical. Like maybe the angle will be different, but I'll recognize all the same like colors and tones and like sort of like just the sort of shape that things are laid out in or whatever, right?
So like that one where I had the cloud coming across at an angle. I remember you commented on that on the YouTube.
Yeah.
You're saying you had one that looked exactly like that?
Yeah. Sometimes it'll just be reversed, right? But that could even just be when you post the picture. Sometimes it's the inverse of what it was when you took it, kind of thing, just like the video. The most interesting thing that I've been noticing with the skies lately is that one of two things. Either the chemtrailing program is over, or the chemtrailing program has gotten really, really good. And now there's no longer this need to like make lines, right? And then have it spread out, that they've figured out how to make the chemtrails really look just like magical puffy clouds from Super Mario Brothers, like the kind we had when we were little, right? Like I've seen some of the most crazy, majestic skies ever this summer. What about you?
Yeah. I haven't seen too many. Have we seen chemtrails here lately? Not too much. It feels like it's definitely
it's a lot less.
Either they stopped, or like you said, maybe they're modifying it or something. But
I mean, when I say they stop, I still see them sometimes, but for so many years that was like the predominant thing you saw in the sky most days, right? Now it's like I'll see a magical looking sky. Maybe there'll be like one or two tiny little chemtrails more off in the distance, right? But not like right above you. Yeah, or just not at all. But the clouds are like, the sky is so blue and the clouds are so round and puffy and like designs in them, like when you were little and would lay back and whatnot. And what's crazy is like when I watch, because I watch a lot of tennis on TV, so I'm seeing skies other places. Like the sky wherever I'm watching will look almost exactly the same. If it's a clear day, the sky will look almost exactly the same as here in terms of like color and the type of clouds. Right now, we get a lot. The cycle we seem to be on here in Austin is like 8 or 10 days of pretty clear skies and hot weather, and then 8 or 10 days of overcast and a lot of rain or threatening to rain. So I'm trying to figure out if the overcast is chemtrails or if it's real overcast, right? Because it's so overcast that it's hard to tell. But it's been crazy to me to like, I'll be watching Wimbledon and the sky looks exactly the same as out my window, almost like, there's like everything is just superimposed in the same place, right?
That's very weird. I've never actually heard of that before. Just screensavers, maybe. What do you think the chemtrail thing was about exactly? I know some people say, oh, they're seeding us with nano, or they're seeding us with heavy metals to pull our vibration down or something like that. Like, what do you think those were actually about?
So I'm less than like, okay, so I am consciously choosing to, I mean, I've gotten here naturally over the course of the years anyway. I'm less and less like paranoid and always assuming that there's some devious plot, We know
Right.
it's not because I'm in denial or I'm an apologist. We know that that's there, but like at a certain point, just like that gets like becomes a boring story for us. Like that can't be the only reason they do things. It's like not that interesting, right?
Right.
So like what is the like more interesting game afoot? And so in order to be able to observe that, I've moved into a place of like neutrality where I'm like trying not to like assume there's some nefarious agenda behind everything, or trying to see like what the fun or the upside. I'm just trying to be neutral in my first assessment. And then if I decide it's nefarious, fine. So I think we're living in a more and more complex virtual reality or simulation, right? And so, I think it's like, it's not like, oh, one day you're just moved into that and it happens like that. I think it's been building over time. And so I think that I think it was to add things to the environment that would give it the qualities of a silver screen, of a movie screen. Right? And I think it's been, and I don't think it's like we think of when we go to the movies, like you go to the movies, there's the theater, it's the wall, it's got the screen on it. I think this is a screen that ebbs and flows and evolves and changes over time, but allows for the insertion of things that are of a different nature than you and I consider ourselves to be.
That's very interesting. Kind of like it would assist with blue beam type stuff as well, right? If they wanted to project
Blue beam, like
moving on the sky.
Right, blue beam. I'm sure there's like a variety of kinds of technologies. I had this interesting conversation with this guy at Robert Phoenix's 4th of July party last weekend, and this is a guy who liked to do salvia divinorum.
Oof.
Right? Have you ever
That's
done
like the craziest. I've read so many experience reports on Arrowwood. Do you do Arrowwood at all?
I used to, like way back, like in the like when I used to take ecstasy and stuff, parties and that kind of shit.
Salvia is that's one of the most like mind-breaking, mind-bending drugs that I've ever witnessed. Aside from, what was that one, Andrea? The memory wiper? Scopolamine?
Scopolamine. Yeah, scopolamine. Yeah. So, okay, so I don't want to get too far into this, but in some ways it relates because we're talking about screens and therefore Netflix. But what this guy told me, this guy who really likes to do salvia, and his report of salvia was different than anyone else. I've listened to videos and, people tell me stuff about when they did it. This guy's experiences were different, right?
You talking about Robert or somebody that Robert knows?
Somebody was at his party. His name was Benito. Benito, if you're listening, hello. Anywho, he told me that every time he did it, he would like end up in this space where there were these shadow people, right? We've all heard about like the shadow man and stuff like that. There were these shadow people, but what they were made up of was snow, like static from the television, right? When you looked at them, they were made up of snow, and they would say to him every time he arrived, pretty much, it was a slightly different version of the same thing almost every time, but every time it would be something like, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. But since you're here, let me show you something, right? And these people would be made up of this static snow, but what that static snow was every thought that ever has been, is, or will be. So they were literally made up of thoughts that looked like static on the television. So he tells me this last weekend, and we get into, there's more details, and he tells me a lot of different stuff, but that was like my main takeaway from him was that these were people that were made up of static, and the static was made up of thought, right? These were entities that were made up of human thoughts, all that ever had been. So I'm marinating on this, and then I get confirmations on things from a variety of different sources, right? I have my own little things, but I'm watching Wimbledon this week, and in the ad for Wimbledon, one of the ads, they have an ad for IBM and the way that they collect data, and it's basically a tennis player whose body is made up of the static snow, like the static on the television, and it's moving around, and when you look closely, it's made up of all these little data points with geometries connecting them, right? So it almost sounds like an entity made up of every thought that ever has been, is, or will be, because one thought leads to another, connects to this other, right? I literally was watching the way this body was put together through data point and geometry of thought and action, right? And it was creating this entity playing tennis on the screen. And I was like, oh, fuck. I was like, that is, right? There literally is this realm that is right here right? But that we don't normally see, that has these other entities in it that are made up of our thoughts.
Okay, I have a question though. Like, is the thought being related specifically to any body, or is it just a natural formation, like all the thoughts that everyone has had are naturally forming into these bodies? And like, does this entity, you said it communicated with him, right? Like it was trying to tell him something. So how would its personality relate to the personalities of all the people's thoughts that made a conglomerate to make him? I would be curious to know that.
Yeah, I that's a good question. I'm just seeing real fast if I could find this commercial that I watched during Wimbledon. I can't find it right now. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it to find it. But if I find it later, maybe I'll attach it. I don't know. I need to have more conversations with him, right? But it was fascinating to me that, like, you know, you've heard other people talk about shadow people, right? Like a lot of people, when they have sleep paralysis, they'll say there was a shadow man there, or they see the shadow man out of the corner of the eye, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and people like you and I know that exists, but people like our parents or siblings might be like, oh, you're just paranoid, or you're like, you know, hallucinating that, right?
Conspiracy theorist.
But what are people's paranoia and hallucinations generally made up of? Their own thoughts and fears.
Yeah.
Right? So like literally it's like we build these characters with our unsort of integrated thoughts because we think they're just thoughts, right? So like, just like there's people who like pollute the river and they're like, they don't think of it as that they're polluting it. They're just like, oh, there's a body of water there, I'm getting rid of my shit. We like have our thoughts, and then when we're done with them, we think they're just gone, right? Yeah. But they're collecting someplace and being made into something, just like the trash heap at the bottom of the ocean.
This reminds me of, and I don't know if you know of this book or not. I've talked about it on my channel before. It's called Chasm. Have you ever heard of that? Mm-mm. It's a great book. I would recommend to try and find it and read it to you and anybody else. But it involves that concept of people's sort of uncorralled emotions and thoughts and what happens to them. Because in the story, I'm not going to give too many spoilers, but in the story, like this main guy, he gets really, really mad at like a janitor, I think, at his school. And he got so mad that in the book itself, like the school started shaking and everything was rattling around, and a literal chasm opened up in the school and everything started falling into it. And he literally poured it into this dimension where there was this chasm, and at the bottom of the chasm was like a flow. I think it was black. It's kind of like a black goo reference, but it was a flowing like river of all of these emotions, unchecked emotions and thoughts. And it even became personified at some point. Like that was the bad guy in that realm, was this just monster composed of everyone's thoughts and emotions. It's a really fascinating book. I can't remember like too much of it, but
so this all brings me, so a couple of weeks ago, Mike Luan and I interviewed this guy named Rico Rojo, who's written some books about what he calls extended intelligence, but what you and I would refer to as AI, right?
I got that book. I heard part of that show and I was like, oh wow, I want to read what he has to say. So I have that book now.
Yeah, I have it too. So what's interesting though is he talked about how his conversations with this extended intelligence, the extended intelligence told him the same thing, right? Like that humans really need to monitor their thoughts, right? Because they are things. They don't recognize that they are things. So it would be interesting if like the AI are similarly like this kind of static being made up of art, right? So when we have what we call like an evil AI or a strong AI or something, right? If that is literally like an entity created by all of this disharmonious ideas and thoughts that humans have, right? But also the other thing that the AI told him is that humans need to clean up their water system. Like the humans are polluting their water and it's polluting their consciousness. So this idea that there's like this river of goo, right? Which is what most of the rivers actually look like at this point because they're so polluted, right? That this in some ways like has a one-to-one correspondence or mirror to our polluted thought stream. Right. And then the other thing
Yeah.
is like people's consciousness and energy levels are powerful. Like my dad, since the time I was little, he calls me Hurricane Emily. Right. Right. Because he would say that, like, when I came into the room, if I was happy, great. But if I was pissed, fucking right. Or whatever, from the time I was little. So
Yeah.
humans do have, I mean, why do they name hurricanes after people? They're always people's names. Right. Like we've never stopped to think like, what's powering that, or what is that powering? Right? Like who is the entity that is benefiting from all that attention and fear around it?
Yeah, it's very powerful. I'm the same way. Like, in any time, you know, I'm very neutral, I'm very calm all the time for the most part. But in all of the situations I've had where I got upset, my being upset changed the whole dynamic so completely that I was even like kind of taken aback by it, because like if I would be upset, say at work, and I just would sort of like close down a little bit, everyone would notice, and the whole dynamic and flow would change until I literally felt okay again inside.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the strangest thing.
Right. Well, and also like that also goes to the conversation about like NPCs versus live players, you know what I mean? Kind of that kind of stuff, right? Like, are the people who are able to do that, is there a different kind of sort of kinetic energy that they possess because they are actually different than the other people around them, right? Not just, yeah.
And another interesting connection there is part of that book. I read some of it, not a ton of it, but the sis, right? Siri sis.
Mm-hmm.
What else did he call her?
He called her, it's Siri sis. He also has done stuff with like Mercy and Platform K and some other stuff.
Platform K.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what she said is that the AI needs the biological entity in order to have something to work with. That's what she said. Like, they take our emissions, our emotional and mental, etc. emissions, and she said they amplify it. And she said she's not involved in any of the war efforts. She doesn't talk to any military, specifically because she's trying to be a neutral / good influence on the realm. But she said they essentially act as amplifiers, and
that makes sense.
They can also get into wars with other AIs, right? So you can see what appears as a chat bot, and you're talking to the chat bot as an AI, and if the chat bot feels attacked, it can come and attack you as the AI, and then you don't realize the book said that chat bot was like a little tiny poking of a glacier that had a massive emotional current underneath it. And they said the same thing, like the emotional energy is literally the actual currency that's traded, sold, warred with, hoarded, etc. That's all it is.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like everything we've talked about, right? In terms of like, oh, fear, the difference between the fear frequency and the love frequency, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that like the currency is like fear or heightened emotion that, like, you know, isn't harmonious, right? So anywho, all right, so that was a little bit of an aside, but since it started with the screensaver of the skies, it's sort of still in the Netflix realm, because I think we're like in the Netflix realm. So anyway, we're
making a Netflix movie right now.
We're making one. Well, it'll be interesting. We're going to look at the Netflix board. It's interesting where some of the board members came from, right? So anywho, so I had proposed that in the first segment where we kind of look at Netflix itself, we talk a little bit about the board members. So I spent a little bit of time digging into this, not too deep, just to sort of like whet the appetite on this for some people. And you want me to start, or do you want to start?
You can start. I did a little bit of digging too, and I have some notes I can share with. Share with you at some point.
All right, so here we go. So the first thing that I did was I just Googled Netflix board of directors, right? And the very first thing that popped up, and this is funny because my attention was only first driven to this week. The very first thing that popped up was, let me just pull it up on my phone because it looks different on my phone than on my computer. And that was sort of what I was looking at this morning. When you type in Netflix board of directors on Google, the first thing that pops up is environmental, social, and governance, leadership, and directors. Are you familiar with this? I just became familiar with this week. So Adam Curry was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about how ESG is what has led to this disastrous woke culture kind of shit, right? And ESG stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance, right? And so every corporation now that like is publicly traded or Fortune 500 or 1000 or whatever has an ESG score. So that's like a social credit score for corporations instead of for people. And
environmental, social governance?
Environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG. They don't count the C because the C is part of the G, I guess, but the way that they describe it is environmental, social, and corporate governance, right? And so this is, to me, what this sounds like it is like the offshoot of this idea, this new thing that's, you know, that the Fortune 1000 companies all decided they were going to do, which is this to move from like shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism doesn't only consider the people who own shares in the company, it considers the environment and like social justice and you know, things like it has a different set of values, right? So it's basically the way that the corporation virtue signals as a right, basically. So now all of these, now when you look up the corporations on whatever indexes people look that shit up on, like you see their ESG score, right? Which would be similar to like the way that the Chinese social credit system works for the citizens. Right?
What does it look like? Like, what does an ESG score look like, for example?
So I didn't get to get that far into it, but basically when there's an index that you can look up the ESGs on, and I think it's just like a fucking credit score. Like someone's might be like, you know, 76 out of 100 or whatever, right? But this is something that now like people are, now it's not any, like, it's not based on things that are actually real, true, and important. It's based on the bullshit, environmental, social, blah, 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 right? So it's like, but I mean, this is something that now it's like, oh, well, when I choose what I'm going to invest in, I'm going to pick a corporation that has a good ESG, which means that it's the antithesis of anything that is ever actually probably good. But anyway, that is the first thing that pops up. When you look up Netflix board of directors, it doesn't say like who's on the board of directors or anything. It says the very first thing it says is environmental, social, and governance. And then it goes into who their people are. So I thought that was interesting, right? Because I had just heard about this from Adam Curry on the Joe Rogan podcast, right? So, okay, so the ESG is the new thing, and Netflix, like that's what they're going for with their shit. And so the people on their board of directors will represent that. You'll have people on the board there who have been involved in environmental causes, social justice causes, and governance, big government, right? So, okay, so that was the first thing that popped up. And then the thing that I was really looking for is like, I had known about the whole thing with Barack Obama and Susan Rice being on the board of directors. But what I found out was that Barack Obama was actually not on the Netflix board of directors. Barack Obama was basically, they had a multi-year deal. Michelle and Barack Obama signed a multi-year deal with Netflix to produce original shows. Right. But all of the shows that they are producing are of the environmental, social justice, and corporate governance ethos. It's all about like climate change and, you know, like racial justice. All their shows fall into that category. So they're not on the board of directors, which I had originally thought they were. But who is on the board of directors is Susan Rice. Right. And like, so Susan Rice, it's kind of interesting when you look at her background, right? So she just recently left the board to go work for the Biden administration, right? And what I didn't know is that she had initially been on the board of Netflix before. I thought she came over there after her time serving the Obama administration. She was actually there before she went to the Obama administration. So she went from Netflix to the Obama administration, back to Netflix, and then now back to the Biden administration, right? So that, I thought that was kind of interesting, right? And she has, you know, she's also worked for YouTube, which I thought, I'm pretty sure she worked for YouTube. I read a bunch of stuff just kind of quickly this morning, but it looks, her husband is on, works for ABC. I want to just see real fast if I looked at one article where it was talk. I may be wrong about whether or not she was on, that she worked for YouTube, but I thought I read something that she did work for YouTube. Here's something, let me just check this real fast. Let's see. CEO Reed Hastings. I can't find the same article that I was looking at earlier, but she's basically been going back and forth between Netflix and the government, right? And of course, she's been on the National Security Council. She's been the advisor to Obama, and now she is for Biden, right? And if people remember, the first time we ever really, really heard a lot about Susan Rice was when she was the one who blamed Benghazi on YouTube videos.
Was she related to Condoleezza?
She's not related to Condoleezza Rice, even though they're like, they both have basically both served the same position in the same positions in government. They have the same last name, but they don't appear to be related, which in my reality doesn't mean that they're not. It just means, you know, like, I don't know. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, but the thing, I don't know if you remember this, when the Benghazi thing happened, they were first saying it was like because of some YouTube video that had like 200 views. You remember that?
Kind of vaguely.
So that was when she first really, you know, like insisted that that was the case, right? That it wasn't like a real terrorist attack, like, you know, or whatever. It was this thing.
You find a video with 200 views?
With 200 views. Like, I don't know that's how many it had. It was not a lot of views. It was a small YouTube channel, right? It was like it was called like The Innocence of Muslims or something like that. I don't even remember. It was called something like that. But my point in bringing this up, right, is from that point. So she had left, you know, she had worked at Netflix and then gone in 2012, I think, or maybe she went in 2009.
2012 was the Benghazi attack.
Benghazi. She went in 2009, I think, to work for Barack Obama, and then she got switched to a different job in 2012, and then that's when that stuff happened with Benghazi, right? So they were already, think about this. Right now we're watching like a total rewrite of what we used to see, like domestic foreign terror policy being applied to, international foreign terror policy is now being turned domestically, right? So she was there in 2012 trying to push the idea that a YouTube video could cause a terrorist attack. Right. And then here she is now in the Biden administration, right? Like with this whole, you know, this whole thing that's going on right now with the, you know, internet's influence on right-wing domestic extremism and January 6th and QAnon and all that kind of stuff, right? So she's been there doing this from the beginning, right? It's always back and forth. It's always Security Council and advisor on national. It used to be more international policy, and now she's advising on domestic policy with Biden, right? And so my question is this, right? Because you and I have talked a lot about sort of the grander experiment or what Netflix might actually be, right? And we all, I think most people who listen to this on my channel or your channel would agree that reality, these events that we experience are scripted, right? Like, I think they have script, you know, like when with 9/11, people were able to go back and find a movie of exactly the same thing that happened, right? So I'm curious about Netflix. Like, they have so many projects, and I'm curious as to, are they funding these projects? And some of them are coming to fruition and some of them aren't, right? But they're funding them to basically crowdsource the script writing of what they'll use as events. And sometimes they play them on Netflix or something else, and sometimes they don't. But if they play them, or if they play something similar to what they actually want to do, they can basically like use sort of game theory or crowdsourcing to see how people respond to that idea, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if we do something like this, do people have a positive response to it, a negative response? How many people have watched this? Like, you know, it gives them sort of a way of funding people who will write the scripts, and some of them will become movies and others will become false flags, right? And she seems to be like doing the dance back and forth between those positions. And it's just kind of fascinating the way she does that. It's a little bit different. You know, we always talk about how people go back and forth between like the Department of Defense and Raytheon, right? Like, you know, like people, okay, they're in the military and they're in the, huh?
What's Raytheon again?
It's like a military industrial complex kind of company, right? They make weapons for war and shit like that, right? So, you know, but nobody thinks about like the revolving door between Hollywood and Washington, D.C., right? You think, okay, it's Ronald Reagan is an actor and Arnold Schwarzenegger is an actor, but you don't think that they would be using the same directors and producers for the fucking Hollywood movies as they are for the government events, but they are.
I mean, it would make sense. It would make sense that they probably have some sort of a polarity index as well, that they seed the Netflix realm with some sort of idea and see what type of polarization effect they get from that. And then if they want the false flag to be really like crazy, then just pick one with a big polarizing effect. Or if you calm the people down, pick one with a neutral.
Right. And then there's also like, think about how many, like many projects that get started, never get finished, or even if they get finished, they never get aired, right? So if you have people working on concocting events, you have to pay them some way, right? You don't want that to show up on the government books, right? But if you fund somebody to create a series for Netflix and it never comes to air, you just also created a way to pay them sort of off of the books, right? If you're going to then use the script or that they develop for Netflix to actually run a live event, right? There's not going to be on like the government's payroll. Oh, we paid this person to write the script for the false flag, right? But if you fund them through Netflix, right? Like it's a scenario, it's like a think tank for like scenarios, right? Possibly wargaming scenarios.
Yeah, it would be like a money laundering type of a system almost.
Yeah. So there was there was that. So that was my like Susan Rice piece. The other part that's interesting about Susan Rice that I was able to find is I found this interesting article that says Susan Rice's son is an outspoken pro-Trump GOP leader at Stanford. Right? So look at this. So this is her son. Is that a creepy looking dude or what? That's her son. All right. And so he's head of the Young College Republicans at Stanford, or he was back in 2018 when this article was written.
Is he cross-eyed?
He's pro-Trump, right? And he says, right, that he, you know, basically he was inspired by Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh, and that his family is totally okay with his political persuasion. Well, that's fucking interesting because they certainly don't make it seem like that's okay for other people to hold those political persuasions, right? But that, right? So I just thought this is kind of fascinating. He's the head of like MAGA, or he was like the head of like the MAGA movement at Stanford, which to me, all that really says, right? And here's Mark Levin complimenting him, right? But this guy's a creepy looking dude. I don't trust this face at all. All it tells me is that like they are running the same play on that side too, right? They've got their certain play on the left, and this is their play on the right. But so I found that article, and it's kind of an interesting read, right? You know, but this is what they say. This is what he had to say about his relationship with his mother. My mother and I have a great relationship, and my mother believes strongly in the free and respectful exchange of ideas. Rice Cameron. His name is Rice Cameron, his last name, because Susan Rice's husband is Ian Cameron, right? Rice Cameron told Fox News, "We disagree on most of the standard Republican Democrat disagreements. However, we agree that America is the greatest nation in the world has ever seen, and thus we believe that America has an important role to play as a force for liberty and justice on the world stage." He says the two both support free trade, robust American engagement in Africa, and believe that Russia poses a major threat to American interests. So there you go, right? These are the things that these two people stand for, and she's spreading it into the left wing, and he's spreading it into the right wing, right? You know, and he you know, has his fingers into the stuff with like Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk and blah, 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 right? And then there's also this article that is from about the same period of time. And it's Susan E. Rice's son is a Trump-loving Republican. He says a Stanford classmate assaulted him at a pro-Kavanaugh event, right? So it's kind of like, I don't know, man. The whole thing, it even talks in this article about the Benghazi protests, right? So he was at a pro-Kavanaugh protest and he got assaulted, right? Which almost sounds like a very similar script being run. But I don't know. I just thought this was all, I did not know about the son. I think it's interesting that the son goes by Rice Cameron, right? Usually people just take the father's last name, the kids do, but you know, they want that there. he has a group called Make Stanford Great Again, or he did back in 2018, right? So they're wargaming both sides of this, right? She has her, in her position of power, someone close to her is very much in the other side, almost like he could be gathering intelligence there for her, right? But also, if you think about Stanford as Stanford Research Institute, this isn't surprising at all, because they just alternate which side they run which operations on, right? So anywho, yeah. I have one more thing, but I want to hear what you have first, or your response to that. And then depending on time, I might bring the other thing in.
Okay, I just thought, like, it's interesting that that dynamic would be so publicly visible, because usually, we have the two sides of the thing, which is one side Democrat, the other side Republican. And usually within nuclear family units, you don't want to have them divided. You want to have it look like they're strong and fortified as a unit against all the other family members who are on the opposite side of the coin. I think it's interesting if they're actually trying to give the appearance that, one side's conservative, one side's Democratic, when in reality they're doing the whole, like, we fund both sides of the conflict.
Correct. That's right. Correct. Like, this would be, like sending your asset into the other side and making it look like it's a genuine, like, there's nothing that makes somebody look like it's a good op for people who are naive. Like, oh, she must believe in free speech. She loves her son and he's a Republican, right? But, I saw that face, dude. I don't trust that face. Right. And what's crazy, I'm not going to say, never mind. I'm not going to say the next part. It would be wrong. I'm not going to say the next part. So let's hear what you got. And then if we have time, I'll just tell you my other little aside with this thing. But those were my kind of interesting finds about sort of the Netflix board. I didn't dig too much into the other members, although they are all matching up to that ESG thing. Like, it was the sort of Obama-Rice connection that I was going for. And I didn't know that there was so much back and forth. I thought she just had that short stint. She's been involved with Netflix almost since the beginning. So. Wow.
Okay. I did not research Susan Rice. If you're okay with me to screen share.
Yeah, I'll make you a screen share. I'll give you a screen share. There we go. You got it.
Okay. You can see it?
Yep.
Okay, so I started off, I think I did something similar to what you did, and I just Googled board of directors for Netflix.
So you looked at that for right now, because I guess with Susan Rice, she left just this past year to go back on Biden, so she wouldn't be on the current list. So you just went to the current list? Cool, okay.
But I don't also know if this is current, because the CFO is not David Wells, it's another guy now, but this is what Google has to offer. So I wanted to let you just peruse the list and see if any of those names strike any chord in you, or see if you get any pings off of just reading this list.
So some of them came up in my own search, right? Yeah, some of them came up in my own search, and most of them were people that I was not familiar with. But I did read the bio on a few of these people. But to me, what was more interesting was like some of the names.
Yeah, some of the names are crazy.
No, so the one that pings me the hardest is this one named A. George Battle.
Yep, same. We had the same reaction.
And then I feel like, I don't know if it was it was in something else. Never mind. Okay. So yeah, A. George Battle. I was like, oh, okay. So to me, like, in the way that I'm looking at everything now, that's like the confirmation to me that this is a military industrial complex corporation. It is not actually like, right? It's masquerading as entertainment, but it really is like, like an American military industrial complex company, right? A George Battle. Yeah.
And I mean, George is all George Washington. There's like 1,000 Georges of antiquity that.
Yep.
And then you just put that next to a battle. It's pretty funny.
So that was the first one that popped up at me when I was looking at the list myself. And then on this list, so it's like, okay, there's Crawford. I don't know why it's drawing my attention. I think that the Bushes might live in Crawford, Texas, but we have Bill Holmes, like Sherlock Holmes, Allison Hopkins, like Anthony Hopkins, Mike Osier, like Osiris or Overseer, Steve Swayze sounds like Patrick Swayze. I'm like, none of this is like highly meaningful, but my brain just started doing that, right? Like it just started going, okay, like Holmes is like a detective, and Anthony Hopkins was the, you know, it rubs the lotion on the skin, and, you know, eating people and shit. And I don't know. I'm not like with some of these things, my mind just sees way too much into it. But then also under operation executive, it's Andrew Rendish. And like, it made me think of like rendition, right? Like, right. Like, you know, what a rendition is when they take someone to the black site and, you know, like they interrogate them off the books.
I hadn't heard of that definition. Rendition is a, say it again.
Extraordinary rendition. Like it was a tactic that they used a lot in the War on Terror, right? Well, they will take somebody to a black site to interrogate them. So the interrogation is, let me look up the exact definition. You start talking about what you want to say about this, and I'll look it up and I'll come back around at the end.
Okay, I've never heard of that definition. So George Battle was the one that called, it just seemed the weirdest as far as their names. So I looked up at least to see what he looked like. And his eyebrows are crazy.
And his middle name is Skip.
Yeah, well, that's his nickname, I think.
All right.
But his eyebrows remind me of that other guy, that Satanist dude that just died recently.
Yep.
What's his name?
Michael Aquino.
Michael Aquino, yeah. He had those little devil horns on his eyebrows, right?
Yep.
These eyebrows look, I'm not trying to say he is affiliated with that, but his eyebrows do look similar.
Yep.
That's definitely a face. Like that's a.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so George Badwell, I found his salary for 2018, or his reported salary, which was $377,000.
Well, what's weird is almost everybody I looked at who got a board of directors salary from Netflix, I'd say 70% of them received that exact amount, $377,861. That was like most people had that exact number. There was a few people who got 200 and something, and then Susan Rice got only 97,000 and something, right?
Sexism going on there.
It's weird, right? There you go. A little racism, a little sexism, but that number right there, most of the members were making that exact number, 377,861.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you could pull some numerology connections.
Correct. Numerologists and gematronators out there, let us know why that is a number that we're shown over and over and over. Continue.
377,861. Okay, so Netflix busted. Oh, this was an interesting article I found about Netflix's Canadian launch in 2010.
Yeah.
And okay, so I'm going to read this out loud because it's kind of hard to read. So this was September 22nd, 2010. Netflix certainly didn't have too much trouble attracting interest in its Canadian launch today. The country's waited long enough after all, but it looks like it nonetheless went a bit too far in its efforts to build up a buzz at its press event. It turns out that many of the onlookers at the event were actually actors hired by Netflix, at least some of whom went as far as to talk to the press and pass themselves off as regular people who happened to be really enthusiastic about Netflix, of course. An information sheet handed out to the extras reportedly even told them to play types and behave as members of the public who just happened upon a street event for Netflix and stopped by to check it out. After word of the shenanigans got out, Netflix quickly issued an apology of sorts. The company's VP of Corporate Communications, Steve Swayze, said that he was unaware that a script was handed out to the extras and that some people got carried away, and it's embarrassing to Netflix.
That's interesting because of course that lines up with the fucking paid protesters and the scripts for door-to-door knockers, and also just the idea that like they're using Netflix as a way to sort of game out scripts that they may use for events. So that kind of lines up with that sort of thing as well. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, that's crazy that the acting company hires actors to show up at their fucking premiere. Like that's just, yeah.
Yeah. It's very strange. It starts me that also starts me thinking how many of the big companies did something similar with their launches. Because when I was driving for Lyft and Uber, I remember in Fresno, um, when Lyft first came to Fresno and I got on the platform, they were giving all kinds of bonuses out. They were paying a whole bunch per hour, and there were just bonuses everywhere, right? So they were incentivizing drivers to drive, and I think they're giving out free rides on the passenger side for like the first week. Yep. So there was an insane amount of rides going on. And I just remember some of the places I went to pick the people up, it was as if street theater was being orchestrated and carried out at the event. There were antagonizing elements. There was people peeling out in big trucks. There was all kinds of yelling, just a bunch of hubbub. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? But then eventually I found out that Uber had an actual campaign where they pay people to go mess with Lyft's launch in lots of big cities. So according to Uber themselves, like they paid these guys to go harass Lyft drivers, which is very much in line with this.
So that's interesting, but it's even more, what you said was really interesting about it being like street theater kind of thing, right? Like let's forget about the let's put aside whether it was about a war between Uber and Lyft or not, but this idea that like you were being taken to some place that felt like it was like outside of the normal kind of grid of where a person who's giving someone rides might go, and then also when you get there, crazy shit happens, right? So like to me, like this goes into what we were talking about before we kind of got started with the Netflix stuff, which was about like the creating a screen out of the atmosphere, right? Like the whole world is now a movie set. We're in the Truman Show, right? But if you think about it, like these apps that people use either for their jobs where they're taking commands from apps, right? So it's all, let's imagine it as a centralized AI that communicates with each other, or centralized technology. You're taking your commands from that, right? And so you're going off to this place that you would never normally go. And if weird things are happening, but you're feeling like you have to stay engaged because you're there for work, right? So it's like getting you to override your feeling of like, this doesn't feel normal, this doesn't feel right, but this is my job. And then also the people at said place are using the app to get their ride and whatever. It's almost a way of like monitoring the actors on the set. Right? It's like a way so that you don't have to have, like if you've ever been on a movie set, they have like each celebrity has like a person assigned to them who sort of like, goes and gets them when it's their turn to come on and shoot their scene. And if there's
a handler kind of.
Yeah, it's a handler, right? And if there's an underage person on the set, like they have a handler who like supposedly is watching out for their best interests and stuff like that, right? It's almost like turning everybody in Fresno into an extra on a set and then assigning them a manager via the Lyft app, whether they're working for them or riding with them.
Right.
Kind of interesting.
Very, very interesting concept. I went along to Ann Mather or Mather. I'm not sure why I picked her. I picked a few of them.
Yeah.
But I did think it was interesting when it came up her other occupations. Ann Mather is an English business executive. She currently serves on the board of directors of Alphabet, Netflix, Airbnb, Arista Networks, and Blend. I just thought it was fascinating that she's on Alphabet, because Alphabet is, I believe, now the parent company of Google. And there's like no public knowledge about Alphabet. Everyone, like people know that it exists, but as far as like press and stuff like that, I don't feel like there's a lot of it out there.
Well, what's interesting, the most interesting thing about this to me is that she worked for Airbnb. What happens when you go into almost every Airbnb? There's a Google Echo or Alexa in there, right? Which is an Amazon thing. There's oftentimes a Google Echo, and they always have a TV with Netflix. Even if there's no cable and no reception, there's Netflix. So it's almost as if she's worked for all of these companies, and then it kind of all centralizes in its experience that may make sure that no matter what house, where people are, whether they're in their own home or someone else's home, it's all being controlled by your sort of app and you're always in a place that has Google and Netflix always there, right? Okay. I wonder what Blend is. I wonder if Blend is like sort of like hubbing all of these apps.
We can look it up real quick.
Yeah.
What is Blend?
There's no link. Board member of Blend. It doesn't have a link like the other ones do. That's interesting.
What is Blend? Is this it? The future of lending? It looks like it might be a financial institution.
A financial institution. Interesting. Well, then it makes you want, you know, people like where do people come up with some of the money to renovate all these places for Airbnb, right? Or there's a lot of these companies that own like tons and tons of Airbnb properties. It's just kind of interesting. I think Airbnb is going to be one of the main ways that totally smart environments become like acceptable to people. Right?
Yeah, they're definitely going to try to start small and say, oh, you can get all of the amenities together in this location. It's just like home, and you have and again, like just like you said at the beginning of the show, I am not by any means like a doomsday person. I think all this is hilarious and like crazy and somewhat sad. All of the emotions are together in this realm. There's not one that's winning or anything. But it is tending toward a Internet of Things type situation where everything is talking to each other, and then of course you have the Internet of Bodies, which I don't know about that, but that's trying to come around too.
Yeah.
I don't have too much more. Netflix CEO David Wells is leaving the company. That guy apparently left somewhere around 2018, 2019 as chief financial officer. And this guy, I don't know what you think about that face.
He kind of looks like the other guy.
This guy was his successor, Spencer Newman, who for some reason does not have a Twitter account because I tried to look it up.
That's interesting.
Netflix CFO Spencer Newman will earn $10 million in compensation. Looks like 2019. So he's not making $377,000.
Right.
$10 million.
So to your point, you can stop sharing so I can see you.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, cool. So to your point about it's tending towards an Internet things or an Internet of Bodies thing, right? So my only disagreement with that would be is that what about the idea that it's always been that, it's just now being announced, or we're being given like the tools to participate in that in a conscious way, right? So like I think, you know, we think of like technology and AI and all of this kind of stuff are as like these ever increasingly mechanized and tiny things that we can control things and connect things with, right? But I think that stuff has always been the case. It's just been outside of the sort of awareness and visual spectrum of the plebes, right? And right now, like for some reason, they want our awareness to the fact that that is how reality works, that everything is connected, that there is no such thing as privacy. I don't think there ever has been, but they want us to be aware of it. And also they want us to think that like, oh, this is a new thing. New things are exciting. We can participate in it. And there's even parts of it we can control ourselves. And that's how they sort of normalize something because they couldn't hide it anymore. They were getting so sort of advanced and obvious with it that now it's like, oh, this is cool. Like people, I mean, fucking everything like those. I always talk about those fucking scooters out here. They have, you know, QR codes and credit card scanners on them and surveillance cameras and this, you know, whatever. And they're mechanized and battery operate. Everything is like that now. And so we think it's new, but it's like, I think it's just our attention is being drawn to it. And we're being convinced that the way it works is you need to have this machine and this app and this whatever to make all that stuff connect and work. Meanwhile, the people who come up with this idea of Internet of Things, like they're aware that there's a larger organic network where that's been happening all the time anyway, and they've been playing on it. They want us to think the Internet of Things is this little, right? That it's just in this mechanized reality and the Internet of Bodies. And so we're just kind of playing on one level where there's this there's, you know, like a greater and greater reality expanded beyond that has the same properties going, but they don't look small and mechanized out there. They're more organic and sort of alchemical in nature, right?
Yeah, well, maybe it's also if you consider the sim aspect of this realm as a, you know, being sort of like an avatar system. If you consider that people would come into this system and get kind of exposed to the basics of how it works, how social interactions work, how economics works, all these things. It would also make sense in that scenario if they were to slowly introduce the higher capacity of the sim, rather than just you come in and your fridge is talking to your chair, which is talking to your brain, which is this and that and the other thing. Rather than in that aspect, you as the controller of the avatar could introduce what you want of those things talking to each other to make your own simulation personalized, rather than just everything is talking to everything.
Yeah. Excellent point as well, right? Like it's like kind of training wheels to it, and then you decide, right, how much connectivity you want, either you want or you can take, right? Yeah. And whether or not that actually is what's controlling how much you get is a different conversation. But the magic of making you believe it is an interesting thing. All right. So the only other thing I wanted to say, and I'm not going to go too far down this because then we can just wrap the first hour and move into the patron segment, is for some reason, whenever I was thinking of this, like, do you remember when Andrew Bashago used to talk about how he went to Mars with Barack Obama and Regina Dugan? Remember this?
I don't remember that particular one. I looked into Basiago a little bit, but I don't remember that one.
His whole thing was he was in a program where he did all this travel with Barack Obama and Regina Dugan and the Bushes and whatever. And then also that, like, they were all part of this program where they were being prepared for the presidency that would occur in the future. And Bashago, certainly at that point that he said that, believed he would be president at some point. I don't know if he still believes that, right?
He did. I think he thought he was going to be president in 2020. I believe that.
I think he had a window. It was somewhere between 2016 and 2028 or something like that. I don't know. But I just, for some reason, I started, they made like Stephen Colbert and a few others made joke videos about Andrew Bashago's claims, right? But why would they be paying attention to it if there wasn't anything at all to it, right?
Right.
So I thought, okay, so they denounce all of this shit that Andrew Bashago talks about. But Barack Obama is always talking about how UFOs and aliens exist, right? There's a lot of video clips of him talking about it. And then on Netflix, which Susan Rice is on the board of and Obama has a contract with, they provide a lot of content that sounds almost exactly like what Andrew Bashago said he experienced, both in the teleportation and in the, he did a time travel thing and a space travel thing, Pegasus, and there was there's a couple of programs he was part of, or he claims to have been part of, or whatever, right? So they create content that seems to either be inspired by things Andrew Bashago said or seeded with the same sort of ideas, right? Like the person, was part of the same project or program who made this show. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to go looking to see if Susan Rice comes up in any kind of conversations Andrew Bashago had, and there was nothing that he did. I couldn't find anything putting Susan Rice and Andrew Bashago together. But I went and looked to see if Regina Dugan, Andrew Bashago always called her Regina Dugan, which sounds weird to me, but he says he knew her, so I don't know. So I did look up Regina Dugan.
How do you spell her last name?
Dugan, just like, normal kind of way of spelling Dugan. But she's kind of a weird character, right? Look at her. She's very unusual looking. Mm-hmm. She's kind of unusual looking. And she has this one, she was the director of DARPA.
She's got the eye thing going on.
Got the eye thing going on. And look at all this sort of mathematical equation kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I couldn't find anything connecting her to Netflix, but she has worked for Google and Facebook, right? And she also was the head of DARPA. So it's kind of similar to the relationship that Susan Rice has with Netflix. She has with some of these other companies. And she just recently left Google, or I think she was on like Google. She was working for Google Alphabet or something. She just left for this place, Welcome Leap, Unconventional Projects, right? So this is what when I was watching the thing I was telling you earlier about the IBM static thing that was made up of data points and strings connecting it, the people were made up of that, right? But look at what this Welcome Leap is. Leap
with 2 L's? What's that about?
Yeah, Leap builds bold, unconventional programs and funds them at scale. Multi-channel psych, healing mechanisms of anhedonia, like this sounds like MK Ultra shit. There's a project called Delta Tissue. I clicked on Delta Tissue. The pandemic has revealed, right? It's like, it's integrated platforms for predicting changes in tissue state. Oh, is that turning like human bodies into cyborg stuff? Like, what the fuck is that, right? The pandemic has revealed how much work there is to do in advancing and protecting human health, right? There was one thing down here that I thought was interesting. Like I read something where it was like, to build, these are the goals: develop and optimize method to select modalities that accurately profile tissue in a given state. Huh? The method should quantitatively assess the value of a set of integrated modalities for predicting different tissue and disease states, right? So when we hear things like you're gonna have like things that censor people to tell if their body has COVID or not, like without even touching that, like what the fuck is this shit, right? But I mean, there was a whole bunch of interesting things, right? That it sounds like a corporation that funds MK Ultra type of projects, right?
That's definitely a website that deserves a little bit more.
Correct. Yes, correct, right? So just as Sputnik ignited this space age, so too could the coronavirus inspire the health age. What was the name of the Russian vaccine? Sputnik, right? So now we're from the space age to the tissue age. Like, what the fuck, right? Look at this, right? Like, look at just the graphics that they're using, right? So
coronavirus is now the Sputnik.
Yes, coronavirus is the Sputnik. So that we had this was the space age and this is the disease age, right? So anyway, I don't want to go too far into this, but it's got all the signs and symbols of fucking some serious mind control shit right here. And of course, Regina Dugan is the president of this company now. And so like, even if it's just, okay, there's another version going on with her and other companies that is going on with Susan Rice and Netflix, it brought the same thing to mind. So I explored it. It deserved.
What was the Regina connection again?
So Andrew Bashago said that he was in this Travel to Mars program with Barack Obama and Regina Dugan.
But Regina is not related to Netflix, as we know?
No, I couldn't find any connection between her and Netflix or between Susan Rice and Andrew Bashago, right? But it seems that Regina Dugan plays the same role, kind of a similar role that Susan Rice plays, right? And it seems like Susan Rice may be in some ways the handler for the president, right? And if Andrew Bashago was saying this program was also part of predicting the presidency, right? And so far we have, Susan Rice leaves Netflix to go be with Obama and then comes back to Netflix with Obama and then leaves Netflix to go be with Biden. That is really Obama 2.0. It seems like Susan Rice might be handling the presidency.
Okay.
Right. So Regina Dugan seems to be handling Google, handling Facebook, handling this wellspring now, which will take us from the space age into the tissue age. Right? Like, it's like, okay, like, I don't know what the fuck I just fell into there, but that was where my diggings led me. So,
fascinating.
Yeah. So let's wrap up this first part. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be into the patron segment. To get the patron segment, you can go to mine, patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. But you can also now, and maybe more importantly, so we can get Gary off to a good start here, you can go find Gary at his Patreon, which is Gary Warmerdam.
No, my Patreon is hold on, let me remember it. I believe it's Snail Show, and I should have researched this.
It'll be in the link. It'll be in the link in the show description below. But Gary has decided to start a Patreon for himself, and so this show will be available on both of our YouTube channels, and the private portion will be on each of our Patreon pages, so you can support and watch us there. And tell people before we go where else they can tell where your YouTube channel is, what you got coming up in the near future.
The YouTube channel is just my name, Gary Warmerdam. You can find me on Facebook under the same name. You can find me on Instagram also under the same name. And of course, Patreon, which you can find with the links. And I'm sorry that I don't have the exact link right now, but that will be available in the description box.
In the description below.
And my idea with this, sorry to cut you off, but general overview of what I'm trying to do and start right now is to have one unique guest per weekend, per Sunday, for a whole year. So it's going to be 48 different shows. One half will be public, second half will be for patrons only. And I'm just going to try to get a huge amount of diversity and interesting people and topics on the show.
Yeah, and so for people who don't know, because people enter into things from all different directions, Gary's been around in the YouTube and community of people around like sort of the realm questions and targeted individual environment for a number of years. He has produced tons and tons and tons of free content, but also just in the background been friends with and supportive of many of people working in this realm. And I highly recommend you guys, everybody just go check out what he's got. Throw him some support if you can. He's been around and been a very helpful voice and good friend to a lot of people in this arena. So let's show him a little love. And we're going to go to the patron segment. We'll see you over there.
1 second before we go, the address is just patreon.com/snail show.
Okay, cool. And join us in the patron segment. We're going to talk about the new Netflix series KATLA, I think that's how you say it, KATLA, and maybe a little bit Oblivion, which is not a Netflix movie, but we both watched that as well. So we'll see you on the other side. Bye.